Let's say that you wanted to buy 2b2t, the Anarchy Minecraft server with over 10 years of history. How much would it theoretically cost? Players have actually made attempts to buy the entirety of 2b2t from Housemaster, the server owner. But the offers those players gave always varied to a great extent. This was also backed up by a poll I made, asking how much you think 2b2t is worth. Ignoring the people who voted it's worthless, which, spoiler alert, it's not, the votes are really all over the place. So how would someone go about figuring out how much 2b2t is worth? It's not like Housemaster just gives these numbers away. So instead, we're gonna have to use what little information we have about the server to our advantage. Alright, let's get started. To determine how much 2b2t is worth, we have to estimate the total value of 2b2t's assets, expenses, and revenue. We'll start with the pretty straightforward ones, like the 2b2t.org domain name. I used 3 different domain appraisal sites to see what each one would say. GoDaddy said it was worth just over $1,000. Freevaluator.com showed about the same. SDBot.com said less than $100? I think I'll trust that 1,000 figure a little bit more, but it still seems a bit low. I mean, this is the iconic name you type in every time you join the server, but because I want these estimates to be conservatively low, I'll just go with $1,000 for this. Next, we have the server hardware. This is also pretty straightforward. After all, Housemaster just recently posted on the 2b2t subreddit some of the new specs for the server. For the CPU, it runs on an Intel i9-12900K, which MSRPs for around $600. This of course requires a pretty beefy motherboard, which can go for around $600 as well. He also said that he's using DDR5 memory with an unspecified capacity, so I'm going to make the assumption that he's using 64 gigabytes. Now, getting DDR5 RAM right now isn't cheap, and that's only if you could even find it for sale. I found this listing on Newegg for $470, and that's just for 32 gigs, so we'd have to double that amount to get the total 64. That totals up to $940 just for the RAM. Now for the SSDs. Housemaster did not state how much capacity the drives have, but we do know that 2b2t's map is reaching 13 terabytes, and he has said before that he runs high-speed NVMe SSDs in a RAID array, likely RAID 1 for total redundancy. So I'm going to make the assumption that he has at least 16 terabytes of usable storage, doubling that for the RAID 1 redundancy, making 32 terabytes in total. I'll also make the assumption that he used 2 M.2 expansion cards, being $400 each, with a total of 8 4TB high-performance NVMe SSDs, which cost about $650 each. In storage alone, this would run Housemaster $6,000. He also stated before that he makes multiple weekly backups onto a separate server. Assuming that server uses regular hard drives, it probably has at least $2,000 worth of hardware. Adding cases, fans, and other miscellaneous components for both servers, the estimated value of 2b2t's server hardware totals to around $11,640, and that's certainly a lowball estimate. That rules out about 6% who voted that the server was valued under 10 grand, but we still have a lot more to cover. Now, with all that computer hardware, where do you put it? You could just throw it all into your basement and call it a day, but with home internet speeds usually being pretty slow compared to data centers, it probably wouldn't be enough to support all the players on the server and waiting in queue. Plus, it would also pose a security risk given the nature of the server. So it's most likely co-located, which means you give your own privately owned server to a data center where they operate that server with their resources. With a 10 gigabit internet connection, this would cost an absolute minimum of $300 per month. Times that by 2 for the backup server. This is an ongoing cost for 2b2t, which in terms of valuing a company would be measured by the year. So we'll add $7,200 to the server's total value. Now, Housemaster's only source of revenue for 2b2t is, you guessed it, the priority queue system, which for $20 a month lets players bypass the sometimes insane server queue wait times. But the issue is that we have absolutely no data of how many players actually bought priority queue every month, but we can estimate. Just recently, I created a poll on my channel with a simple question: do you currently pay for priority queue on 2b2t? Now, ignore the total votes and percentages. They don't matter at all. The only thing we care about is the number of yes votes. So after around 2 days of voting, 2,327 people said yes, they currently have priority queue on 2b2t. That totals to over $46,000 in this month alone. Now I can't simply assume that every single 2b2t priority queue customer voted in this poll, so I'm going to make the conservative assumption that it's at least double this amount, over $93,000 per month. Assuming these rates stayed relatively the same for the past 3 years, and adjusting for PayPal transaction fees, that would mean Housemaster would make over $1.1 million in a single year. That statistic alone is absolutely insane, but we're still not done yet. 2b2t has a lot of other ongoing costs for server operation. One of the biggest costs is plugin development. Off-the-shelf and custom server plugins are used not only to optimize the server for high player counts, but for stopping players from using powerful game exploits and cheats which could compromise the server's integrity. There's also apparently active development on upgrading 2b2t to 1.18. So with all that in mind, I will make the general assumption that House spends at minimum $20,000 every year for these services. I say this because 2b2t is in an extremely uncommon scenario where so many players are on the same Minecraft map, which historically causes server stability issues. Those issues have to be dealt with, and it's certainly no straightforward task. Now I think we're missing one last important thing to factor in. 2b2t's most prized asset, the 10-year-old map. This alone is what makes 2b2t so special. I would even put this map into the classification of an art piece simply because of how unique it is. So how can you even put a price tag on something like this? There seems to be literally no price comparison to base this off of. After all, the highest price paid for any single piece of art was $450 million. The only obvious way to put a price on this map is to put it up at auction and see what people are willing to buy it for. So if I were Housemaster and I wanted to put 2b2t's map up for auction, I would put the starting bid at the very least $500,000. Think about it. Over 2 million total hours are spent playing on the server every year. 2b2t has seen more player activity in a singular map than any other Minecraft server in history. Plus, it's the largest ever Minecraft map, over 13 terabytes. $500,000 in my opinion would be considered a steal for something like this. But in the end, the price would simply be based off of who's actually willing to pay the most for it. Now, accounting for other miscellaneous costs like the 2b2t.org domain name renewal, website hosting, server security, and legal fees, the total estimated value of 2b2t would be just over $1.6 million. We can actually compare that amount to Hypixel's value, which some people estimated to be around $50 million. With that comparison, 2b2t actually seems pretty cheap. But then again, I put conservatively low estimates for all the calculations just because I didn't want to overvalue the server. So accompanied with this video will be a spreadsheet showing all of my calculations. This gives everyone the opportunity to look over my work and make changes how they seem fit. A link will be in the description. I also want to give a huge thanks to those who lent a hand with advice about different parts of the valuation process. Now, like I said, this amount is purely a conservatively low estimate. We'll probably never know for sure how much the server is actually worth unless Housemaster becomes transparent about his finances, which is extremely unlikely. But it's still pretty neat to at least get the best possible idea of how much 2b2t is actually worth. Maybe one day, someone who loves block games so much will actually buy the server, but I could only wonder who that would be.